I see you, Tessa. I think you're going to like the stories tonight. Or at least I hope we do. Yes, you are, sir. Welcome in. Well, the good news is I usually do a couple of different stories, so it's if you miss the first one, you always can get the second or third one. Tonight we've got 3 stories, so I dipped into my collection of early issues of Weird Tales magazine. You know, I didn't even look. I'm convinced that TikTok hates me. Hey, Lynn, welcome. I posted 3 promo videos today for tonight's live. The first one is sitting at 28 views. The second one's sitting at 23 views, and the third one's sitting at 11 views. Needed as a poster. Oh, I made it in Photoshop. I can just send you the file. Oh, stupid thing is not sitting where I want it to. So I am. That's my secret plan. Next, I'm just going to convince you to move up to the cold and damp of Western New York. Hey, Savannah, welcome in. You know, it's funny. You're the second person to comment on getting here early or on time. That's awesome. So we'll give. I mean, we have some of the lowest cost of living in the entire country. Like I own a house that is 1,600 square feet, 4 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, 2-car garage. I have a quarter of an acre of land, and I think when I bought it 10 years ago, I paid $107 for it. Of course, now it's worth twice that, but hello from Scotland. Hey, Buford. How we doing, neighbor? Oh, yeah, it's crazy. Like, I was thinking about moving out towards my best friend out in Washington, and looking at the only houses I can afford out there would be, like, trailers. It's crazy. It's crazy, but we're also a really good food town. Now, I mean, people don't believe me, but first of all, Western New York has the best pizza in the country. I will die on that hill. But there is like every kind of ethnic food that you can think of, and really good quality. All right. Well, it's pretty much time to get started. So this is going to be a fun night. Garbage plates. I haven't had one in so long. I was actually at one point considering doing a video series where I, find the best garbage plate in Rochester. And then I thought about it and I went, that might kill me. I might die doing that. Hey, Katie, welcome in. It is so cool that I have regulars. That makes me so freaking happy. All right. Well, it's time to get started. It would be a glorious death, yes. Oh, I get to Valhalla and the doors are closed because I ate myself to death. All right. Well, good evening, everybody. Oh, you need to know what a garbage plate is? Okay, so it is the iconic food of the city of Rochester, New York, where I live. It is traditionally served with a plate that has mac salad on one side and home fries on the other side. And then on top of that, you have your choice of meats. We either have regular traditional hot dogs or white hots or burgers or cheeseburgers. And then on top of that is meat, hot sauce, onions, and mustard. It's like an entire 2 days worth of calories in one sitting. It's amazing. It's amazing. It's amazing. What? Burger plate for the win. Oh, see, Tessa, have you had a white hot plate? Because the white hot plate is so Rochester, because it's freaking Zweigel's the best freaking hot dogs. Oh, it's a funny story before we get started. Funny story. So most of my mother's family is from Utica, New York, and each area of New York State, just like any other state, has different foods. Always take half home. Yeah, I don't know that I can get through one anymore. So whenever we cook hot dogs during the summer, you always ask somebody, do you want a red or a white? And so I went and asked my cousins and my uncles, do you guys want we're making hot dogs, do you guys want a red or a white? They looked at me like I had an extra eye suddenly grow in the middle of my forehead. And they're like, red or white what? And I went, hot dogs? And they go, you have white hot dogs? Where the hell do you get a white hot dog? And I was probably 12 at the time. The only thing I could think of was albino pigs. Anyway, that's my white hot story for the night. All right. Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome back to Storytime with UndeadPapa. Tonight we have 3 stories pulled from the pages of Weird Tales magazine, first published over 100 years ago in 1923. The stories of strange houses, restless dead, and things that should have stayed buried. Hey, Wings. So we'll begin with a man left alone in a house with a dead body and the uneasy feeling that something still lurks in the dark. So wherever you're listening from, dim the lights, sit back, and relax, because story time is about to begin. This is The Living Nightmare by Anton M. Oliver. You mean to tell me, demanded Jim Brown, that those people left town and expect you to stay in that house alone tonight? Why, yes, said Macmillan, preparing to leave. They've gone to Virginia and will be back on Thursday, when the funeral will take place. I pressed the button. Thank you for the reminder. And they left the dead body lying in the living room. Of course. Where did you expect them to leave it? On the porch? And you're going to sleep in that house, alone, with the corpse? Yes, what of it? There's nothing to be afraid of. Taking his hat and coat, Macmillan departed. Pleasant dreams, called Brown as the door slammed behind him. The night was cold, and the atmosphere was clear and hard. The snow crackled under his feet as he walked. Silly idea, he muttered, but he couldn't help wondering why the Mitchells with whom he had made his home had left the house on the same day that Mrs. Mitchell's grandmother had passed away. In his mind he went over Mrs. Mitchell's explanation. She had told them that they were going to Wheeling, to the deceased lady's old home, where a sister lived, and would remain there until the funeral. And she had asked, "You are not afraid to stay here alone, are you?" No, of course he was not afraid, but it was strange that they should leave the corpse in his charge and depart. Then it came to him. Funny he hadn't thought of it before. The Mitchells must be superstitious. They probably had some silly notion about a house being haunted while a corpse was in it, or something of that sort. That must be it. But how ridiculous! Still, the Mitchells were a little queer anyway, reflected Mac, as he turned up the ice-covered path of the Mitchell residence. It stood surrounded by high buildings and stores, in a section of town which days gone by had been the very heart of the city's social life. It was one of the largest and oldest homes in the city, and now it was an outcast, so to say, among the monuments to industry and progress. Built years ago by the husband of a woman who now lay dead within its walls, it was in a style of architecture long since abandoned. Everything about it was high and narrow. The building itself, the windows and doors, the porch columns, and the roof high up among the tree branches. Mac walked unhesitatingly toward the big dark house. But somehow the formidable brick walls that always looked so inviting seemed cold and inhospitable tonight. Strange shadows were playing in the windows. He looked up at his own window. He didn't exactly fancy the idea of going past the room where lay the dead woman, he admitted to himself. But he certainly was not afraid. Not he. With grim resolution, he thrust the key, which he had taken from his pocket while coming up the walk, into the lock of the front door. The huge glass-paneled door squeaked as he did so, and he was almost startled by his own reflection in the shining glass. He turned the key in its lock and threw the door wide open with unnecessary vigor. A hot wave of air greeted him. The house was warm, surprisingly so, considering that it had been unoccupied all day. His heart, for some unexplainable reason, was beating rather fast as he entered the dark hall. He turned sharply to the left and reached for the electric light switch. His hand had often turned that switch, and had often found it instantly in the dark, but tonight he had to feel for it. He turned it once, twice, 3 times, but the hall remained dark. The dark suddenly seemed to give him almost physical pain. Listening acutely, he tried to account for this. Why were the lights out? The street lights were on, and there was light in several of the homes he had passed. He stood motionless. There was no sound. The dark house was buried in death-like silence. Then, with nerve-shattering suddenness, came a sound as real as that of his heart, which was beating so that the blood was throbbing in his ears. He whirled to face it, but as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. With clenched teeth and damp forehead, Max stood motionless. Then it came again, a sound like the distant scream of a siren. Gradually, he collected his senses, and reason took the place of bewilderment. He reached for his matches, and striking one, he stepped over the gas chandelier, turned the valve, and presently a blue flame leaped high from the lamp, which had not been adjusted for months. With somewhat trembling hands, he turned the air adjustment, then the gas, until finally the familiar yellow light illuminated the hallway. Then he again heard the noise, this time a little louder and nearer. His decision to investigate suddenly left him. He stood motionless, unable to move, for he had not only heard, he also felt. Then, with a sudden resolve, he stepped swiftly to his room, which was on the same floor and adjoined the library. The light from the hall cast a long, distorted shadow on the floor before him. It was so still now that the silence surged in his ears. Lighting his own gas lamp, he locked and bolted his door. His pipe lay on the dresser, and he lit it nervously. Then he looked at himself in the mirror. "How ridiculous," he said, half aloud with a forced laugh. Then he began slowly to undress. All was quiet and peaceful here in his own room. How foolish to let himself get so excited. The lights had probably gone out all over the city since he had entered the house. And as for that noise, it was probably outdoors somewhere, and in his mind he had associated it with the perfectly harmless corpse lying in the next room. "Darn Brown," he murmured. "He got me all wrought up over nothing with his kidding." And having finished undressing, he retired, leaving his light on full, however. In spite of the fact that his own explanation of the origin of the strange sounds had, in a measure, satisfied him, he lay awake for a considerable length of time. He was drifting off on the first soft currents of sleep when he suddenly sat up with a jerk. He had heard a noise. His lamp was flickering weirdly, and he could hear its faint singing, barely audible, yet it seemed to his ears like the mighty rush of steam from a boiler, for his ears were trained to hear a different sound, a sound he must hear again, the source of which he must locate. His body began to ache from sitting rigidly in one position. Still, all was silent. Suddenly, with a sense of being jerked to consciousness, he again heard the noise like the shriek of a siren. It seemed distant, yet close. His heart labored so hard that he could feel its beat all through his body. The shriek continued for several moments, and then all was silent again. He wanted to rise, but he could not. He was not afraid, he told himself, and yet... Suddenly he heard the sound of footsteps, steps that seemed to come from the interior of the wall, pass through his room, and die away gradually. Holding his breath, he listened. The big clock in the front room struck the hour of midnight. He counted each beat as it rang through the house. He was wide awake now. The white curtains seemed to glimmer like snow-lit sun, and the clock chimes in the deathly silence sounded like those of a mighty tower clock. As the last note died away, Max suddenly remembered that the clock had been stopped by Mrs. Mitchell as a mark of respect to her who, in the adjoining room, was awaiting burial. A sudden feeling of relief came over Mac. It was clear now. Somebody had come back. Mr. Mitchell, perhaps. That explained everything. Confidently, Mac got out of bed, and, unlocking his door, stepped into the hall. How different everything looked. How natural and homelike. The light that had such a ghost-like experience a short time ago seemed friendly and quite natural now. At the foot of the stair, Max stopped and called. He called louder and louder, but all remained silent. Suddenly, for some inexplicable reason, he approached the door of the room next to his, seized the doorknob resolutely, and with a sudden push swung the door open. The rays of the gas light in the hall fell directly into the room, and what they revealed sent a cold shudder of horror through him. Before him stood 2 empty pedestals. The body had disappeared. Turning violently, he almost ran to the front door and pulled it open. An icy gust of wind hit his thinly clad body. For several moments he stood breathing the cold night air. Then, with a sudden determination, he slammed the big oak door shut. As the door slammed, there came a sharp report, like the snapping of a wire, followed by a thunder and crashing and wailing. The electric light came on, and the same footsteps that had sounded through the house before came closer and closer. He felt a sharp pain, like the thrust of a knife between his shoulder blades, and then he fell in a swoon. Weeks passed before Mac was well again. Excessive exposure had brought on pneumonia. As soon as he recovered, he summoned me to the hospital and begged me to find a new lodging for him and remove his belongings from the Mitchell home. I tried in vain to explain that he had misunderstood Mrs. Mitchell regarding the disposal of the corpse, for they had taken the body with them for burial in Wheeling, and it was not in the house at any time after their departure. But Mac was resolute. He listened indulgently, patiently. Then, laying his white, hot hand upon my shoulder, he looked earnestly into my eyes, and with a voice that carried conviction he said, "I know what I felt in that room that night. It had a hold on me, and it is waiting for me, and I am not going back." Mac is well again now, and one can see him at the club most any night. But whenever anybody starts to speak of the hereafter, he rises and hurriedly leaves the room. The end. Hey, Chaka, welcome in, man. So what do you guys think of that one? Did we enjoy it? I can see that. Thank you, sir. Oh, it's all right, crazy mama. I got 2 more stories to go here. Definitely short. Definitely a short one, but it's a good one. And like I said, I've got 2 more stories to go, so we are good to go. I'm gonna pull that one up, pull the second one up here. I hope everybody is having a good evening, and thank you for coming in and joining me, joining us all. I love the fact that I have people that come in almost every live. Yes, I am clickety clicking. Let's see. All right. So, and now we move from a house where something may not be at rest to something far older. Something that never should have been found. This is The Ghoul and the Corpse by G.A. Wells. This is Chris Bonner's tale, not mine. Please remember that. I positively will not stand sponsor for it. I used to have a deal of faith in Chris Bonner's veracity, but that is a thing of the past. He is a liar without conscience. I as good as told him so to his face. I wonder what kind of fool he thinks I am. Attend now, and you shall hear that remarkable tale he told me. It was and is a lie. I shall always think so. He came marching into my igloo up there at Aurora Bay. That is in Alaska, you know, on the Arctic Sea. I'd been in the back country trading for pelts for a New York concern, and due to bad luck... I remembered. And due to bad luck, I didn't reach the coast until the third day after the last summer steamer out had gone. And there I was, marooned for the winter, without chance of getting out until spring, with a few dozen ignorant Indians for companions. Thank heaven I had plenty of white man's grub and tins. As I said, here came Chris Bonner marching in on me the same as you would go down the block a few doors to call on a neighbor. "And where the devil did you drop in from?" I demanded, helping him off with his stiff parka. "Down there," he answered, jerking an elbow toward the south. "Let's have something to eat, McNeil. I'm hungry as hell. Look at the pack, will you?" I had already looked at the pack he had cast off his shoulders to the fur-covered floor of the igloo. It was as lean as a starved hound. I heated a can of beef bouillon and some beans, and made a pot of coffee over the blubber-fat fire that served for both heat and light, and put these and some crackers before my guest. He tore into his meal wolfishly. "Now, a pipe and some tobacco, McNeil," he ordered, pushing the empty dishes aside. I gave him one of my pipes and my tobacco pouch. He filled and lighted up. He seemed to relish the smoke. I imagined he hadn't had one for some time. He sat silent for a while, staring into the flickering flame. "Say, McNeil," he spoke at length, "what do you know about a theory that says once on a time this old world of ours revolved on its axis on a different plane? I've heard it said the Earth tipped up about 70 degrees. What do you know about it?" That was a queer thing for Chris Bonner to ask. He was Simon Pure's prospector, and I had never known him to get far away from the subject of mining and prospecting. He had been hunting gold from Panama to the Arctic Circle for the past 30 years. "No more than you do, probably," I answered his question. "I've heard of that theory, too. I'd say it is any man's guess." "This theory holds that the North Pole used to be where the equator is now," he said. "Do you believe that?" "I don't know anything about it, Chris," I replied. "But I do know that they have found things up this way that are generally recognized as being peculiarly tropical in nature." "What, for instance?" "Palms and ferns, a species of parrot, saber-toothed tigers, and also mastodons, members of the elephant family, all fossils and parts of skeletons, you understand." "No human beings, McNeil? Any skeletons or fossils of those up this way?" "Never heard of it. Prehistoric people are being found in England and France, however." "Huh," he said. He pondered, puffing at his pipe, his eyes on the fire. He looked perplexed about something. "Look here, McNeil," he said suddenly. "Say a man dies. He's dead, ain't he?" "No doubt of it," I laughed, wondering. "Couldn't come to life again, eh?" "Hardly. Not if he were really dead. I've heard of cases of suspended animation. The heart apparently quits beating for 1, 2, or possibly 10 minutes. It doesn't, in fact, though. It's simply that its beating can't be detected. When a man's heart stops beating, he's dead. Bonner nodded. Suspended animation, he muttered to himself. That must be it. That's the only thing that'll explain it. Nothing else will. If it could cover a period of 10 minutes, why not a period of 20 or even 100,000 years? If you'd like to turn in and get some rest, Chris, I'll fix you up, I broke in. He caught the significance of my tone and grinned. You think I'm crazy, eh? He said. I'm not. It's a wonder, though, considering what I've seen and what I... Here, let me show you something. He thrust a hand into his lean pack and brought forth an object that at first glance I thought to be a butcher's knife. He handed it to me, and I at once saw that it was not a butcher's knife, as I knew such knives. It was a curious sort of knife, and one for which a collector of the antique would have paid good money. It was a very dark color, almost black, corroded, it seemed to me, as if it had lain for a long time in a damp cellar. It was in one piece, the handle about 5 inches long, and the blade perhaps 10. Both edges of the blade were sharp, and the end was pointed like a dagger. It certainly wasn't steel. I scratched one side of the blade with my thumbnail and exposed a creamy yellow under the veneer of black. Part of that's blood you scraped away, McNeil, Bonner said. Now what's the knife made of? I examined the yellow spot closely. The knife was made of ivory, not the kind of ivory I was acquainted with, however. It was very much coarser grain than any ivory I had ever seen. That came out of a mastodon's tusk, McNeil, Bonner said. I looked at him. He was nodding seriously. He apparently believed what he said, at any rate. Nice curio, Chris, I commented, handing the thing back to him. Heirloom, no doubt. Picked it up in one of the Indian villages, eh? He did not speak at once. He sat, puffing, looking at the fire. Once he puckered his brows in a deep frown. I waited. I've been prospecting as usual, he said at length, down there around the headquarters at Tukavuk. It's an awful place. Nobody ever goes there. The Indians tell me the spirits of the dead live there. I can believe it. It's an ideal place for imps and devils. And I was right through the heart of it. I believe I'm the first. No matter how I got there, I came up from the south last summer. You see, I had an idea there was gold in that country. The place where I finally settled down was in a little valley on one of the branches of the Tukavuk, between 2 ranges of hills running from 500 to maybe 3,000 feet high. Messy-looking place it was, all littered up as if the Lord had a few sizable chunks of stuff left over and just threw them down there to be out of the way. But the gold was there. I could almost smell it. I'd been getting some mighty nice color in my pan. That's what made me decide to stay there. I got there about the middle of July, and I spent the rest of the summer sinking holes in the edge of the creek and along the benches above. What I found indicated that there was a mighty rich vein of the yellow metal thereabouts, with one end of it laying in a pocket of the stuff. If I could locate that pocket, I thought, I'd have the United States Treasury backed off the map. But I wasn't able to run the pocket down by taking bearings from my holes, because the holes didn't line up in any particular direction. What with my interest in trying to get a line on that pocket, I didn't notice that the season was getting late. But I'd brought in enough grub to last the winter through, so that didn't matter. Just the same, it was up to me to get some sort of shelter over my head, so I hustled up a one-room shack about 12 by 12. I cut from the timber on the slopes with my hand axe. Nothing fancy, but tight enough. I put in a fireplace and cut and stacked a lot of wood outside. That done, winter was on me. I simply couldn't resist the temptation to have one more try at finding the pocket that spewed the yellow metal all around here. As I said, I got no information from the holes sunk, and it was pure guesswork. I guessed I'd find my pocket on the side of a certain hill about 200 feet above creek level. A glacier flowed down the side of that hill through a little gully, and my idea was that the ice ground away at the pocket and brought the metal down to the creek, and the creek scattered it. This theory was borne out to some extent by the fact that my best showings of color always came from a point a little below the conjunction of the creek and glacier. It was snowing the morning I took my pan and shovel and started up the side of the hill, keeping the edge of the glacier. It wasn't much of a glacier for size, say, about 15 feet wide. I could see it winding up the side of the hill until it went out of sight through a cleft about 1,000 feet up, fed by a lake up there, probably. I had climbed the hill maybe 100 feet, following the edge of the glacier, when I caught sight of a dark blotch in the edge of the ice. It was about 2 feet under the surface. I brushed away the film of snow to have a look. The ice was as clear as crystal, of a blue color. And what do you think, McNeil? It was a man's body. He paused and gave me a quick glance. He wanted to see how I took that, I presume. The body of a man, he went on, and the queerest-looking man I ever saw in my life. He was lying on his belly, and I didn't get a look at the front of him just then, but I knew it was a man all right. He was covered all over with long hair like a bear, say, not a stitch of clothes. What did you do? I asked. Why, I was that surprised I let my pan and shovel drop and stared at the damn thing with the eyes near popping out of my head. What would anybody do, finding a hair-covered thing like that frozen in a glacier? I won't deny I was a bit scared, McNeil. Well, I stood there staring at the thing for I don't know how long. It didn't occur to me then to ask myself how the thing got there. Certainly the idea of fossils or prehistoric men didn't enter my head. I didn't think much about anything. I just stood there gaping. You know me, McNeil. I guess I'm pretty soft-hearted in some respects. I'd stopped to bury a dead dog I found in the road. I knew I wouldn't rest easy until I'd cut that thing out of the glacier and given it a decent burial. Moreover, I didn't want it where I'd be seeing it when I went to work on that hillside in the spring. And it would surely be there in the spring because I imagined that glacier didn't move an inch a year. So I went back to the shack and got my axe, and with none too good a heart for the job, turned to and made the chips fly. It took me about 3 hours to get the thing out of the glacier. You see, as I came down to it, I went slow. I don't care to hack even a dead man. Say, McNeil, can you imagine what it meant to me, digging a corpse out of a glacier down there on the side of a hill in that devil-ridden country? No, you can't, and that's the truth. You'd have to go through it to know. It was hell. I don't want any more of it in mine, nor what followed either. What was that? I asked when he deliberated. You'll hear. He answered and went on. I got the thing out at last, little chunks of ice clinging to it, and dragged it ashore. If a glacier has a shore. It froze me to look at the thing with those little chunks of ice sticking to the long hair. Once at Dawson I'd seen a man pulled out of the Yukon, ice clinging to him. That was different, though. At Dawson there was a crowd to sort of buck a man up. I turned the thing over on its back to see what it looked like in front. Well, I said, you've seen apes, McNeil. This thing looked like that. I countered, beginning to connect up his first queer questions with what he was telling me. You don't mean it, Chris. I'm telling you, he nodded solemnly. An ape man. That's what it was. More man than ape if you ask me. For instance, the face was flatter than an ape's, and the forehead and chin were more pronounced. The nose was flat, but it wasn't an ape's nose, and the hands and feet were like those of a man. Oh, it was a man, all right. The thing that convinced me, I think, was the knife gripped in its hand. The knife you have there? I inquired. The very knife, he answered. What then, Chris? I urged him to go on. I had a good look at the thing, and started for my shack. Yes, McNeil, I ran, and I'm not ashamed to say so. It scared me. Ugliest thing I ever saw. Eyes wide open, glaring and glinting, and the thick lips parted to show the nastiest set of fangs I ever saw in the mouth of man or beast. I tell you, the damn thing looked alive. No wonder I scooted. You would have done the same. Anybody would. Back in the shack, I sat down on my bunk to think it over. And it was while I sat there trying to puzzle it out that I remembered that theory about the earth tipping over. That gave me a hint of what I had run up against. Of course, I'd heard about fossils and parts of the skeletons of prehistoric man being found. Had I found not a fossil or part of a skeleton, but the prehistoric man himself? That knocked the wind out of me. If that were the case, my name would go down in history, and I would be asked to give lectures before scientific societies and such. Consider it, McNeil. I tell you, I couldn't quite grasp the thing. It was incredible. There I was in this year of our Lord, with the intact corpse of a man who had lived God only knows how many centuries ago. That body, understand, could well be the key to the mystery of the origin of mankind. It might possibly settle the Darwinian theory forever, one way or the other. It was a pretty serious business for me, don't you see? Well, I decided to preserve the thing until I could get out and make a report of the find. But how to preserve it? Of course, I had left it in the glacier. If I had left it in the glacier, it would have kept indefinitely, like a side of beef in cold storage. I was afraid to put it back in the hole in the glacier and freeze it in again with water that I carried from the creek. The creek water might exert some chemical action that would ruin the thing, and if I let it lay where it was in the snow would cover it, form a warm blanket, and probably cause it to decompose. Then I'd have nothing left but the skeleton. I wanted to save the thing just as I'd found it. Maybe the scientists would find a way to embalm it. I finally hit on the plan of keeping it in an ice pack. That would turn the trick until the weather took on the job. It hadn't turned bitter cold yet. I tell you, it was a nasty job keeping that thing iced with chunks I chopped from the glacier, and to make it worse, the weather stayed moderate for a couple of weeks. Then suddenly, the mercury in my little thermometer went down with a rush, and it got stinging cold. I carried the thing to the shack and stood it up against the wall outside where it couldn't be covered with snow, and lashed it there. Can you imagine me going to sleep in my bunk in the shack every night after that, with that thing standing against the wall outside, not 2 feet away? Of course you can't. It frazzled my nerves, and more than once I was tempted to cut a hole in the ice on the creek and chuck the damn thing in where I would never see it again. But no, I had to save it for the scientists and get my name in history. That idea got to be an obsession with me. I knew well enough that if I ever told people the tale I'm telling you now without some proof of it, I'd get laughed at. No doubt of it, I sneered. Days went by. he continued, ignoring my sneer. And more that thing outside kept getting on my nerves. The sun went south, and from one day to another I never saw it. The never-ending night was bad enough, but when you add the northern lights and the howling of the wolves, you've got a condition that breaks a man if he's not careful. Furthermore, there was that ugly-looking devil outside to think about. I was thinking about that thing constantly, and got so I couldn't sleep. If I shut my eyes, I'd see it anyhow, and if I went to sleep, I'd have a nightmare over it. Now and then I'd go out and stand there in the starlight or the aurora looking at it. It fascinated me, yet the sight of the thing gave me the creeps. Finally, I began taking a club or my rifle along when I went to look at it. Got afraid the thing would come alive and try to murder me with that knife. And that's the way of things for maybe 3 months and more. My thoughts all the time on that thing outside. Lily, this is a story called "The Ghoul and the Corpse." Well, that couldn't go on, you know. One morning I woke up with the worst headache a man ever had. I thought my head would split wide open. My blood was like molten iron flowing through my veins. I knew what it was. Fever. I had thought and worried about that thing outside until it got me. And I was in for a brainstorm. I was as weak as a cat, but managed to build up a good fire and pack my bunk with all the blankets and furs I had and crawl in. I only hoped I wouldn't freeze to death when the fire went out. I no sooner got all set in the bunk than things let go. I went completely off. I can't say positively what happened for a few days after that. Seems like I remember, though, periods when I was semi-rational. I think once I got up to put more wood on the fire. Another time I saw that thing standing in the doorway grinning at me like the devil it was. I shot at it with my rifle and later found a bullet in the door. My shooting couldn't have been a delusion at any rate. But the door was still fastened against the wolves, and there were no tracks in the snow outside. Excuse me. Bonner paused to light his pipe, and then went on. I don't know exactly how long I was out of my head. I wound my watch before I crawled into the bunk the first time, and I half remember I wound it again when I got up to put the firewood on the fire, and it was pretty well run down. It goes 40 hours without winding, yet when my head cleared it had stopped. I must have been off my nut about 4 days. Well, you can lay your bottom dollar I'd had enough of prehistoric men hanging around the shack by that time. Let the scientists be damned. I was determined to get rid of that thing the quickest way possible. The quickest way, I thought, would be to get the corpse warm so that it would decompose rapidly. Then I'd put it outside where the wolves and ravens would pick the bones clean. The scientists would have to be satisfied with the skeleton. So I made a big fire in the fireplace and got the shack good and hot, then went out and brought in the corpse. I got sick at the stomach on that job, but that was the only way. I didn't have the heart to leave the thing outside and build a fire over it out there. I try to respect the dead, even if the corpse is that of a man who had been dead several thousand years and looked more like an animal than a human being. I laid the thing on the floor before the fireplace, then sat down on the bunk to wait. I watched it pretty close, because being dead so long, I thought when it got warm and started to decompose, it would go like butter. I didn't want the shack to be all smelled up with the stink of it. Probably half an hour went by. Then all of a sudden, I saw the thing quiver. Your brainstorm returning, I interposed. Wait, said Bonner sharply. It quivered. Not much, but enough to notice. That sort of got me. Then I reasoned that anything thawing out like that would naturally quiver a little. Maybe another 15 or 20 minutes passed. Then one of the legs moved, jerked, sort of. It startled me. Remember, there I was, down there in those hills, alone with that thing. I was pretty susceptible to weird influences, understand. Anyhow, the leg moved, and I sat up and asked for a drink of water. I could not help putting in. Bonner continued, paying no attention to my sarcasm. He seemed to be talking aloud to himself. I watched it like a hawk for some time after that. Then, as I didn't see it move anymore, I stepped outside to get some more wood for the fire and to pull a few good breaths of cold air into my lungs. That shack was like the inside of an oven. When I went in again, I saw that the damned thing had turned over on its back. Turned over on its back, I say. And there was a change in the eyes, too. They had a half-awake sort of look in them. A more alive look, understand. And breathing. Yes, sir, breathing. Why the thing didn't see me when I came in and shut the door, I don't know. But apparently it didn't. And believe me or not, the hand that held the knife was open, and the knife was lying on the floor apart from the body. Crazy? I tell you, no. I was as sane as I am now. I tell you, I saw these things with my own 2 eyes, saw them just as plain as I see you now. I see you don't believe me, McNeil. Well, I don't blame you. I hardly believe it myself sometimes. He uttered a little laugh. But there it was, just as I'm telling you. And I was that gone when I saw that the thing had turned over on its back that I dropped the wood I had in my arm. The crash of it on the floor brought the thing to its feet on a jump. You needn't look at me like that. I tell you it did. I take my oath it did. There it was, crouched like a panther ready to spring, the eyes of it flashing like fire, its lips pulled back tight across the gums and the yellow fangs showing. Can you see that? No, you can't. Bonner made an expressive gesture with one hand. Remarkable, but the thing hadn't seen me yet. I was looking at the fire. It was looking at the fire. It was half turned toward me so I could see that. Suddenly, it screamed in an outlandish gibberish and leaped to the fireplace and tried to gather an armful of flames. I take it the thing had never seen fire before. Didn't know what it was. Probably imagined it some kind of wild animal. Naturally, the only thing it got out of that play was burned arms and hands, and the long hair sizzled and curled. It leapt back with a snarl, spitting that funny gibberish. Talk, I guess it was. It came from way down in the belly and sounded like pigs grunting. I tell you, McNeil, I was fair dazed, but I had the sense left to try to help myself. My rifle was leaning against the bunk, and I made a quick dive for it. Then, apparently the thing saw me for the first time. The way it glared at me with those glittering eyes was a caution. I didn't stop to argue. I snatched up the rifle, cocked it, and made a snap shot. The bullet caught the thing in the left breast, and the blood gushed. Of course, you don't believe it, but blood, I tell you, gushed from the breast of a thing that had been frozen in a glacier for thousands of years. Well, here it came like a cyclone. I didn't have time to shoot again. Smell? That thing smelled like carrion, almost strangled me. Maybe you know how the cage of a wild animal stinks if it ain't cleaned out for a week or two. This thing smelled like that, only worse. I can smell it yet. Lord. Bonner wrinkled his nose and shivered. But there we were at grips, the thing making those belly noises and smelling like 1,000 garbage piles. It had the strength of 10 men. I sensed that. It jerked the rifle from me and bent the barrel of it with a double with a twist of the wrists. The barrel of a 38 caliber Winchester rifle. Bent it as easy as you or I would bend a piece of copper wire. Then we were at it, fighting like a couple of wildcats all over the shack. I'm no slouch of a man myself, McNeil, when it comes to a rough and tumble, but that thing handled me like a baby. I could see my finish. We threshed about the floor, me fighting like a devil, it fighting like 40 devils. We kicked into the fire and out again and scattered live coals all over the place, and the shack took fire. I was just about gone when my hand accidentally fell on the handle of the knife the thing had dropped on the floor. I hung on to it and poked away at the thing for all I was worth. No, there isn't inactivity, TikTok. Jeez. Oi, Tessa. Are you being naughty? I was just about gone when my hand accidentally fell on the handle of the knife. The thing had dropped on the floor. I hung on to it and poked away at the thing for all I was worth, driving the blade clean up to the hilt with every punch. That knife, I broke in. This knife, answered Bonner. There's the dried blood on it yet. But I think it was really the bullet that did the work. It must have cut an artery. Anyhow, the blood kept gushing out of the thing's breast. It got on my hands and made 'em slippery. I knew the thing couldn't pour out blood like that and keep going. That's what put the heart in me to keep on fighting. And as I say, I think it was the bullet that did the work in the long run. A lucky shot, otherwise I wouldn't be here now. I felt the thing sagging and going limp in my hands, and its grip began to relax. I saw my chance and put up a knee and broke the grip and kicked it away. It staggered around a moment or two, clutching its breast with its bloody paws, gnashing its fangs and glaring murder at me. Then it crashed down to the floor and fell smack into the flames. I saw plain enough there was no chance of saving the shack, so I snatched up what I could lay my hands on in the way of food and clothing and blankets and tore out. I don't remember putting the knife in my pocket, but that's where I found it later. The shack burned down to nothing, and that thing burned with it. Probably not a bone of it left. The scientists were out of luck, and the mystery of mankind would remain unsolved. I didn't stop to investigate, of course. My job was to make tracks. I knew about this village and came on. How I got there, I don't know. This is a terrible country to cross afoot in the winter. I turned my 10 huskies adrift to shift for themselves when I reached the valley where all this happened. I didn't have the grub to keep them going. I had to walk here. And that's all, McNeil. You can say what you please. I know what I saw with my own eyes, and you can't change my mind about it. Suspended animation? Yes, for a period covering many centuries. It would be a mighty fine thing if we could picture what happened away back there when this old earth tipped over. Perhaps we'd see a man that was half ape, crossing a creek with a knife in his hand on the way to murder an enemy sleeping on the opposite bank. Then suddenly the earth tipped over. Climate conditions in those days were such as to freeze things up in a flash. Things are held in the grip of the ice just as the dust and lava held them in the days of Pompeii, and, well, who's to say what happened? Anything was possible. We don't know the conditions of those days. Anyhow, here I come thousands of years later and dig a man with a knife in his hand out of a glacier. I heat his body in order to decompose the flesh. Instead of decomposing, he comes to life, and I have to kill him. He's been hibernating in a glacier for centuries. I don't know what to think about it. Bonner refilled and lighted his pipe, then looked at me questioningly. Chris, I said, I tell you frankly that I don't believe a word you have said. You tell me you were out of your head for a few days. That accounts for it. You had the Jim Jams and imagined all that. Then try to spring it on me as actual fact. He looked hurt. He looked at the knife in his hand steadily for several long moments, then thrust it toward me, his eyes boring into mine. Then where in the hell, he demanded, did I get this knife? Yeah, I don't know what the Jim Jams mean either. It's like, keep in mind these stories were written and published in 1923. That's 103 years ago. So, thank you all for being here and joining me for these pulp stories from Weird Tales magazine from 1923. That's pretty awesome. Seven Mars, thank you. I thought that was a cool story. Heebie-jeebies, yeah, that's probably what Jim Jams is. I'm calling it the Jim Jams, yes. That'll be one of those things, Tessa, where I DM you someday just out of the blue. I got the Jim Jams. I'm glad you enjoyed it, Electrical Sign. I'm glad you enjoyed it. A lot of these stories, they're all public domain now. So, they're pajamas. Sites like Project Gutenberg and have them, and then there's a couple of other sites out there that have like full issues of all these public domain pulp magazines from the 1920s and 30s, and I love reading these stories. It's like giving them a new life. Yeah, Project Gutenberg is awesome. And reading them to people who wouldn't normally hear them or read them because they probably don't even know that they exist. And these authors, what I think is really cool is these authors probably died, 70 years ago, a lot of them or more. And to think that 103 years after they wrote and published this story, and it may be only one of a handful of stories that they ever wrote and published, that we're sitting here reading them and recognizing their names and saying, it's like, G.A. Wells. Who knew this one? Dragon Rescue. Yes, I loved old radio stories. And there is a project that I'm kind of fermenting in my brain that would deal with doing a sort of live radio with some of my voice actor friends. But I love sharing the old stories. They still give us the Jim Jams. You're really never going to let that go, are you? Yeah, I have. Well, so I'll give you a little piece of it. So, Night of the Living Dead, the original film, they screwed up when they made it, and it is actually public domain. They messed up the copyright. So the script, the music, the film itself are all public domain. So I thought it would be really fun to do an actual like live radio show where we get where I get a bunch of my voice actor friends to voice these characters, and I play a narrator, an announcer, and I do all of the sound effects and all this cool. I just think it would be wild to do it, even if it crashes and burns hard. I think it would still be a crap ton of fun. It is fun to say Jim Jams. So maybe like, like a week from now, I'll just make a video and post it on TikTok, and the only thing that'll be is my face, and I just go, Jim Jams. Yeah, I would think, and I love old radio shows, and I think it is. I would love to do things like that, and that's why part of the reason I love doing this is because I can take these old pulp stories from these old magazines and give them a new life, and be able to, read them to people. Lily, thank you. I really appreciate that. Really appreciate that. I was actually working on audiobook that I'm contracted for. So I was working on that today. I try not to when I'm on my live days. I try not to work to do too much. Tessa, I believe you are correct. The audiobook, it's called The Rise. It's a fantasy novel. The author's name is Adam Webb. I will be probably recording some of it live. So, Glossette, yes, I am. I'm actually about to do the third story that we have tonight. I have some. I have to put them on my. I have to put them on my website and in my link tree. But I've done 6 since July or August. The one I'm most proud of was written by a guy named Gabriel J. Smith, who is here on TikTok, and great guy, awesome to work with. The book is called Bane Birth. Fantastic. It was really fun, and him and I are probably going to be collaborating on his next book. So, anyway, now we move from something uncovered to something waiting, something just on the other side of a closed door. And this is Beyond the Door by Paul Suter. Oh, I didn't have that one queued up. Aha, so you guys didn't have to tell me to hit the button. For those that don't know, I have a habit of forgetting to change the cover art when I do these. And my mods and a few of my regulars are very diligent with reminding me to change the artwork. "You haven't told me yet how it happened," I said to Mrs. Malkin. She set her lips and eyed me sharply. "Didn't you talk with the coroner, sir?" "Yes, of course," I admitted. "But as I understood, you found my uncle. I thought—" "Well, I wouldn't care to say anything about it," she interrupted with decision. "This housekeeper of my uncle's was somewhat taller than I, and much heavier. 2 physical preponderances which afford any woman possessing them an advantage over the inferior male. She appeared a subject for diplomacy rather than argument." Noting her ample jaw, her breadth of cheek, the unsentimental glint of her eye, I decided on conciliation. I placed a chair for her there in my Uncle Godfrey's study, and dropped into another myself. "At least, before we go over the other parts of the house, suppose we rest a little," I suggested in my most unctuous manner. Unctuous, that's a good word, unctuous. "The place rather gets on one's nerves, don't you think so?" It was sheer luck. I claim no credit for it. My chance reflection found the weak spot in her fortifications. She replied to it with an undoubted smack of satisfaction. "It's more than 7 years that I've been doing it for Mr. Sarston, sir. bringing him his meals regular as clockwork, keeping the house clean as he'd let me, and sleeping at my own home nights. And in all that time, I've said over and over, there ain't a house in New York the equal of this for queerness. Nor anywhere else, I encouraged her with a laugh, and her confidences opened another notch. You're likely right in that, too, sir. As I've said to poor Mr. Sarston many a time, it's all well enough, I says, to have bugs for a hobby. You can afford it, and being a bachelor and by yourself, you don't have to consider other people's likes and dislikes. And it's all well enough if you want to, says I, to keep thousands and thousands of 'em in cabinets all over the place the way you do. But when it comes to pinning them on walls in regular armies, I says, and on the ceiling of your own study, and even in different parts of the furniture, so that the body don't know what awful thing she's a-going to find under her hand of a sudden when she does the dusting, why then, I says to him, it's driving a decent woman too far. And did he ever try to reform his ways when you told him that? I asked, smiling. To be frank with you, Mr. Robinson, when I talked to him like that, he generally raised my pay. And what was a body to do then? I can't see how Lucy Lawton stood the place as long as she did, I observed, watching Mrs. Malkin's red face very closely. She swallowed the bait and leaned forward, hands on knees. Poor girl. It got on her nerves. But she was the quiet kind. You never saw her, sir. I shook my head. One of them slim, faded girls with light hair and hardly a word to say for herself. I don't believe she got to know the next-door neighbor in the whole year she lived with your uncle. She was an orphan, wasn't she, sir? Yes, I said. Godfrey Sarston and I were her only living relatives, and that was why she came from Australia to stay with him after her father's death. Mrs. Malkin nodded. I was hoping that by putting a check on my eagerness, I could lead her on to a number of things I greatly desired to know. Up to the time I had induced the housekeeper to show me through this strange house of my Uncle Godfrey's, the whole affair had been a mystery of lips which closed and faces which were averted at my approach. Even the coroner seemed unwilling to tell me just how my uncle had died. Did you understand she was going to live with him, sir? Asked Mrs. Malkin, looking hard at me. I confined myself to a nod. Well, so did I. Yet, after a year, back she went. She went suddenly, I suggested. So suddenly that I never knew a thing about it till after she was gone. I came to do my chores one day, and she was here. I came the next, and she had darted back to Australia. That's how sudden she went. They must have had a falling out, I conjectured. I suppose it was because of the house. Maybe it was, and maybe it wasn't. You know of other reasons? I have eyes in my head, she said, but I'm not going to talk about it. Shall we be getting on now, sir? I tried another lead. I hadn't seen my uncle in 5 years, you know. He seemed terribly changed. He was not an old man by any means, yet when I saw him at the funeral, I paused expectantly. To my relief, she responded readily. He looked that way for the last few months, especially that last week. I spoke to him about it 2 days before it happened, sir. And I told him he'd do well to see the doctor again, but he cut me off short. My sister took sick the same day, and I was called out of town. Next time I saw him, he was... She paused, and then went on, sobbing. To think of him lying there in that awful place and calling for me, as I know he must, and me not around to hear him. As she stopped again suddenly and threw a suspicious glance at me, I hastened to insert a matter-of-fact question. Did he appear ill on that last day? Not so much ill as... Yes, I prompted. She was silent a long time while I waited, afraid that some word of mine had brought her back her former attitude of hostility. Then she seemed to make up her mind. I oughtn't to say another word. I've said too much already. But you've been liberal with me, sir, and I know something you've right to be told, which I'm thinking no one else is going to tell you. Look at the bottom of his study door a minute, sir. I followed her direction. What I saw led me to drop to my hands and knees. Better to examine it. Why should he put a rubber strip on the bottom of this door? I asked, getting up. She replied with another enigmatical suggestion. Look at these, if you will, sir. You'll remember that he slept in this study. That was his bed, over in the alcove. Bolts, I exclaimed, and I reinforced sight with touch by shooting one of them back and forth a few times. Double bolts on the inside of his bedroom door. An upstairs room at that. What was the idea? Mrs. Malkin portentously shook her head and sighed, as one unburdening her mind. Only this can I say, sir. He was afraid of something. Terribly afraid, sir. Something that came in the night. What was it? I demanded. I don't know, sir. It was in the night that it happened, I asked. She nodded. Then, as if the prologue were over, as if she had prepared my mind sufficiently, she produced something from under her apron. She must have been holding it there all the time. It's his diary, sir. It was lying on the floor. I saved it for you before the police could get their hands on it. I opened the little book. One of the sheets near the back was crumpled, and I glanced at it idly. What I read there impelled me to slap the covers shut again. Did you read this? I demanded. She met my gaze frankly. I looked into it, sir, just as you did. Only just looked into it. Not for words would I do ever. Not for worlds would I even do that again. I noticed some reference here to a slab in the cellar. What slab is that? It covers an old dried-up well, sir. Will you show it to me? You can find it yourself, sir, if you wish. I'm not going down there, she said decidedly. Well, I've seen enough for today, I told her. I'll take the diary back to my hotel and read it. Uh-oh. Small, angry Latina noises? I'm not even going to guess. I did not return to my hotel, however. In my one brief glance into the little book, I had seen something which had bitten into my soul. Only a few words, but they had brought me very near to that queer, solitary man who had been my uncle. I dismissed Mrs. Malkin and remained in the study. There was the fitting place to read the diary he had left behind him. His personality lingered like a vapor in that study. I settled into his deep Morris chair and turned it to catch the light from the single narrow window, the light doubtless by which he had written much of his work on entomology. The same struggling illumination played shadowy tricks with hosts of wall-crucified insects which seemed engaged in a united effort to crawl upward in sinuous lines. Some of their number, impaled to the ceiling itself, peered quiveringly down at the aspiring multitude. The whole house, with its crisp, dead rustling in any vagrant breeze, brought back to my mind the hand that had pinned them one by one on wall and ceiling and furniture. A kindly hand, I reflected, though eccentric, one not to be turned aside from its single hobby. When quiet, peering Uncle Godfrey went, There passed out another of these scientific enthusiasts, whose passion for exact truth in some one direction has extended the bounds of human knowledge. Could not his unquestioned merits have been balanced against his sin? Was it necessary to even hand justice that he die face to face with horror, struggling with the thing he most feared? I ponder the question still, though his body, strangely bruised, has been long at rest. The entries in the little book began on the 15th of June. Everything before that date had been torn out. There, in the room where it had been written, I read my Uncle Godfrey's diary. It is done. I am trembling so that the words will hardly form under my pen, but my mind is collected. My course was for the best. Suppose I had married her. She would have been unwilling to live in this house. At the outset, her wishes would have come between me and my work, and that would have been only the beginning. As a married man, I could not have concentrated properly. I could not have surrounded myself with the atmosphere indispensable to the writing of my book. My scientific message would never have been delivered. As it is, though my heart is sore, I shall stifle these memories in work. I wish I had been more gentle with her, especially when she sank to her knees before me tonight, kissed my hand. I should not have repulsed her so roughly. In particular, my words could have been better chosen. I said to her bitterly, "Get up and don't nuzzle my hand like a dog." She rose without a word and left me. How was I to know that within an hour? I am largely to blame. Yet I had taken any other course afterward than the one I did, the authorities would have misunderstood. Again there followed a space from which the sheets had been torn. From the 16th of July all the pages were intact. Something had come over the writing, too. It was still precise and clear, my Uncle Godfrey's characteristic hand, but the letters were less firm. As the entries approached the end, this difference came still more marked. Here follows, then, the whole of his story, or as much of it as will ever be known. I shall let his words speak for him, without further interruption. My nerves are becoming more seriously affected. If certain annoyances do not shortly cease, I shall be obliged to procure medical advice. To be more specific, I find myself at times obsessed by an almost uncontrollable desire to descend to the cellar and lift the slab over the old well. I never have yielded to that impulse, but it has persisted for minutes together with such insanity that I have had to put work aside and literally hold myself down in my chair. This insane desire comes only in the dead of night, when its disquieting effect is heightened by the various noises peculiar to this house. For instance, there often is a draught of air along the hallways, which causes a rustling among the specimens impaled in the walls. Lately, too, there have been other nocturnal sounds strongly suggestive of the busy clamor of rats and mice. This calls for an investigation. I have been at considerable expense to make the house proof against rodents, which might destroy some of my best specimens. If some structural defect has opened a way for them, the situation must be corrected at once. July 17th. The foundations and cellar were examined today by a workman. He states positively that there is no place of ingress for rodents. He contented himself with looking at the slab over the old well without lifting it. July 19th. While I was sitting in this chair late last night writing, the impulse to descend to the cellar suddenly came upon me with tremendous insistence. I yielded, which perhaps was as well, for at least I satisfied myself that the disquiet which possesses me has no external cause. The long journey through the hallways was difficult. Several times I was keenly aware of the same sounds, perhaps I should say the same impressions of sounds, that I had erroneously laid to rats. I am convinced now that they are mere symptoms of my nervous condition. Further indications of this came in the fact that, as I opened the cellar door, the small noises abruptly ceased. There was no final scamper of tiny footfalls to suggest rats disturbed at their occupations. Indeed, I was conscious of a certain impression of expectant silence, as if the thing behind the noises, whatever it was, had paused to watch me enter its domain. Throughout my time in the cellar, I seemed surrounded by this same atmosphere, sheer nerves, of course. In the main, I held myself well under control. As I was about to leave the cellar, however, I unguardedly glanced back over my shoulder at the stone slab covering the old well. At that, a violent tremor came over me, and losing all command, I rushed back up the cellar stairs, thence to this study. My nerves are playing me sorry tricks. July 30th. For more than a week, all has been well. The tone of my nerves seems distinctly better. Mrs. Malkin, who has remarked several times lately upon my paleness, expressed the conviction this afternoon that I am nearly my old self again. This is encouraging. I was beginning to fear that the severe strain of the past few months had left an indelible mark upon me, which, with continued health, I shall be able to finish my book by spring. July 31st. Mrs. Malkin remained rather late tonight in connection with some item of housework, and it was quite dark when I returned to my study from bolting the street door after her. The blackness of the upper hall, which the former owner of the house inexplicably failed to wire for electricity, was profound. As I came to the top of the second flight of stairs, something clutched at my foot, and for an instant almost pulled me back. I freed myself and ran to the study. August 3rd. Again, the awful insistence. I sit here with this diary upon my knee, and it seems that fingers of iron are tearing at me. I will not go. My nerves may be utterly unstrung again, I fear they are, but I am still their master. August 4th. I did not yield last night. After a bitter struggle which must have lasted nearly an hour, the desire to go to the cellar suddenly departed. I must not give in at any time. August 5th. Tonight, the rat noises, I shouldn't call them that for want of a more appropriate term, are very noticeable. I went to the length of unbolting my door and stepping into the hallway to listen. After a few minutes, I seemed to be aware of something large and gray watching me from the darkness at the end of the passage. This is a bizarre statement, of course, but it exactly describes my impression. I withdrew hastily into the study and bolted the door. Now that my nervous condition is so palpably affecting the optic nerve, I must not much longer delay in seeing a specialist. But how shall I tell him? August 8th. Several times tonight, while sitting here at my work, I have seemed to hear soft footsteps in the passage. Nerves again, of course, or else some new trick of the wind among the specimens on the walls. August 9th. By my watch, it is 4 o'clock in the morning. My mind is made up to record the experience I have passed through. Calmness may come that way. Feeling rather fatigued last night from the strain of a weary day of research, I retired early. My sleep was more refreshing than usual, as it is likely to be when one is genuinely tired. I awakened, however, it must have been about an hour ago, with a start of tremendous violence. There was moonlight in the room. My nerves were on edge, but, for a moment, I saw nothing unusual. Then, glancing toward the door, I perceived what appeared to be thin, white fingers thrust under it, exactly as if someone outside the door were trying to attract my attention in that manner. I rose and turned on the light, but the fingers were gone. Needless to say, I did not open the door. I write the occurrence down just as it took place, or as it seemed, but I cannot trust myself to comment upon it. August 10th. Have fastened heavy rubber strips on the bottom of my bedroom door. August 15th. All quiet for several nights. I am hoping that the rubber strips, being something definite and tangible, have a salutary effect upon my nerves. Perhaps I shall not need to see a doctor. August 17th. Once more I have been aroused from sleep. The interruptions seem to come always at the same hour, about 3 o'clock in the morning. I had been dreaming of the well in the cellar, the same dream over and over. Everything black except the slab, and a figure with bowed head and averted face sitting there. Also, I had vague dreams about a dog. Can it be that my last words to her have impressed that on my mind? I must pull myself together. In particular, I must not, under any pressure, yield and visit the cellar after nightfall. August 18th. I am feeling much more hopeful. Mrs. Malkin remarked on it while serving dinner. This improvement is due largely to a consultation I have had with Dr. Sartwell, the distinguished specialist in nervous diseases. I went into full details with him, expecting certain reservations. He scouted the idea that my experiences could be other than purely mental. When he recommended a change of scene, which I had been expecting, I told him positively that it was out of the question. He said then that with the aid of a tonic and an occasional sleeping draught, I am likely to progress well enough at home. This is distinctly encouraging. I erred in not going to him at the start. Without doubt, most, if not all, of my hallucinations could have been averted. I have been suffering a needless penalty from my nerves for an action I took solely in the interests of science. I have no disposition to tolerate it further. From today, I shall report regularly to Dr. Sartwell. August 19th. Used the sleeping draught last night with gratifying results. The doctor says I must repeat the dose for several nights until my nerves are well under control again. August 21st. All well. It seems that I have found the way out, a very simple and prosaic way. I might have avoided much needless annoyance by seeking expert advice at the beginning. Before retiring last night, I unbolted my study door and took a turn up and down the passage. I felt no trepidation. The place was as it used to be, before these fancies assailed me. A visit to the cellar after nightfall will be the test for my complete recovery, but I am not yet quite ready for that. Patience. August 22nd. I have just read yesterday's entry, thinking to steady myself. It is cheerful, almost gay, and there are other entries like it in the preceding pages. I am a mouse in the grip of a cat. Let me have freedom for ever so short a time, and I begin to rejoice at my escape. Then the paw descends again. It is 4 a.m, the usual hour. I retired rather late last night after administering the draught. Instead of the dreamless sleep which heretofore has followed the use of the drug, the slumber into which I fell was punctuated by recurrent visions of the slab, with the bowed figure upon it. Also, I had one poignant dream in which the dog was involved. At length I awakened, and reached mechanically for the light switch beside my bed. When my hand encountered nothing, I suddenly realized the truth. I was standing in my study with my other hand upon the doorknob. It required only a moment, of course, to find the light and switch it on. I saw then that the bolt had been drawn back. The door was quite unlocked. My awakening must have interrupted me in the very act of opening it. I could hear something moving restlessly in the passage outside the door. August 23rd. I must beware of sleeping at night. Without confiding the fact to Dr. Sartwell, I have begun to take the drug in the daytime. At first, Mrs. Malkin's views on the subject were pronounced, but my explanation of doctor's orders has silenced her. I am awake for breakfast and supper, and sleep in the hours between. She is leaving me each evening a cold lunch to be eaten at midnight. August 27th. Several times I have caught myself nodding in my chair. The last time I am sure that on arousing I perceived the rubber strip under the door bent inward as if something were pushing it from the other side. I must not, under any circumstances, permit myself to fall asleep. September 2nd. Mrs. Malkin is to be away because of her sister's illness. I cannot help dreading her absence, though she is here only in the daytime. Even that companionship is very welcome. September 3rd. Let me put this into writing. The mere labor of composition has a soothing influence upon me. God knows I need such an influence now as never before. In spite of all my watchfulness, I fell asleep tonight across my bed. I must have been utterly exhausted. The dream I had was the one about the dog. I was patting the creature's head over and over. I awoke at last to find myself in darkness and in a standing position. There was a suggestion of chill and earthiness in the air. While I was drowsily trying to get my bearings, I became aware that something was nuzzling my hand as the dog might do. Still saturated with my dream, I was not greatly astonished. I extended my hand to pat the dog's head. That brought me to my senses. I was standing in the cellar. The thing before me was not a dog. I cannot tell how I fled back up the cellar stairs. I know, however, that as I turned, the slab was visible in spite of the darkness, with something sitting upon it, all the way up the stairs, hands snatched at my feet. This entry seemed to finish the diary, for blank pages followed it, but I remembered the crumpled sheet near the back of the book. It was partly torn out, as if a hand had clutched it convulsively. The writing on it, too, was markedly in contrast to the precise, albeit nervous, penmanship of even the last entry I had perused. I was forced to hold this scrawl up to the light to decipher it. This is what I read. My hand keeps writing, in spite of myself. What is this? I do not wish to write, but it compels me. Yes, yes, I will tell the truth. I will tell the truth. A heavy blot followed, partly covering the writing. With difficulty, I made it out. The guilt is mine. Mine only. I loved her too well, yet I was unwilling to marry. Though she entreated me on her knees, though she kissed my hand, I told her my scientific work came first. She did it herself. I was not expecting that. I swear I was not expecting it. But I was afraid the authorities would misunderstand. So I took what seemed to be the best course. She had no friends here who would inquire. It was waiting outside my door. I feel it. It compels me. Through my thoughts, my hand keeps on writing. I must not fall asleep. I must think of what I am writing. I must. Then came the words I had seen when Mrs. Malkin had handed me the book. They were written very large. In places the pen had dug through the paper. Though they were scrawled, I read them at a glance. Not the slab in the cellar. Not that. Oh, my God, anything but that. Anything. But what strange compulsion was the hand forced to write down what was in the brain, even to the ultimate thoughts, even to those final words? The gray light from outside, slanting down through two dull little windows, sank into the sodden hole near the inner wall. The coroner and I stood in the cellar, but not near the hole. A small, demonstrative, dark man, the chief of detectives, stood a little apart from us, his eyes intent, his natural animation suppressed. We were watching the stooped shoulders of a police constable who was angling in the well. "See anything, Walters?" inquired the detective raspingly. The policeman shook his head. The little man turned his questioning to me. "You're quite sure?" he demanded. "Ask the coroner. He saw the diary," I told him. "I'm afraid there can be no doubt," the coroner confirmed in his heavy, tired voice. He was an old man with lackluster eyes. It had seemed best to me, on the whole, that he should read my uncle's diary. His position entitled him to all the available facts. What we were seeking in the well might especially concern him. He looked at me opaquely now, while the policeman bent double again. Then he spoke, like one who reluctantly and at last does his duty. He nodded toward the slab of gray stone which lay in the shadow to the left of the wall. "Doesn't seem very heavy, does it?" he suggested in an undertone. I shook my head. "Still, it's stone," I demurred. "A man would have to be rather strong to lift it." "To lift it, yes." He glanced about the cellar. I forgot," he said abruptly. "It is in my office, as part of the evidence," he went on, half to himself. A man, even though not very strong, could take a stick, for instance, the stick that is now in my office, and prop up the slab if he wished to look in the well," he whispered. The policeman interrupted, straightening again with a groan and laying his electric torch beside the wall. "It's breaking my back," he complained. "There's dirt down here. It seems loose, but I can't get through it. Somebody'll have to go down." The detective cut in. "I'm lighter than you, Walters." "I'm afraid not, sir." "I didn't say you were," the little man snapped. "There's nothing down there anyway, though we'll have to prove that, I suppose." He glanced truculently at me, but went on talking to the constable. "Rig the rope around me and don't bungle the knot. I've no intention of falling into the place." "There is something there," whispered the coroner slowly to me. His eyes left the little detective and the policeman, carefully tying and testing knots, and turned again to the square slab of stone. "Suppose, while a man was looking into that hole, with the stone propped up, he should accidentally knock the prop away." He was still whispering. "A stone so tight that he could prop it up wouldn't be heavy enough to kill him," I objected. "No," he laid a hand on my shoulder. "Not to kill him. To paralyze him. If it struck the spine in a certain way, to render him helpless but not unconscious, the post-mortem would disclose that, through the bruises on the body." The policeman and the detective had adjusted the knots to their satisfaction. They were bickering now as to the details of the descent. "Would that cause death?" I whispered. "You must remember that the housekeeper was absent for 2 days. And 2 days, even that pressure." He stared at me hard to make sure that I understood. "With the head down?" Again the policeman interrupted. "I'll stand at the well if you gentlemen will grab the rope behind me. It won't be much of a pull. I'll take the brunt of it." We let the little man down with the electric torch strapped to his waist, and some sort of implement, a trowel or small spade, in his hand. It seemed a long time before his voice, curiously hollow, directed us to stop. The hole must have been deep. We braced ourselves. I was second, the coroner last. The policeman relieved his strain somewhat by snagging the rope against the edge of the wall, but I marveled, nevertheless, at the ease with which he held the weight. Very little of it came to me. A noise like muffled scratching reached us from below. Occasionally the rope shook and shifted slightly at the edge of the hole. At last, the detective's hollow voice spoke. "What does he say?" the coroner demanded. The policeman turned his square, dogged face toward us. "I think he's found something," he explained. The rope jerked and shifted again. Some sort of struggle seemed to be going on below. The weight suddenly increased and as suddenly lessened, as if something had been grasped, then had managed to elude the grasp and slip away. I could catch the detective's rapid breathing now, also the sound of inarticulate speech in his hollow voice. The next words I caught came clearly. They were a command to pull up. At the same moment the weight on the rope grew heavier, and remained so. The policeman's big shoulders began straining rhythmically. "All together," he directed. "Take it easy, pull when I do." Slowly the rope passed through our hands. With each fresh grip that we took, a small section of it dropped to the floor behind us. I began to feel the strain. I could tell from the coroner's labored breathing that he felt it more, being an old man. The policeman, however, seemed untiring. The rope tightened suddenly, and there was an ejaculation from below. Just below. Still holding fast, the policeman contrived to stoop over and look. He translated the ejaculation for us. "Let it down a little. He's stuck with it against his side." We slackened the rope until the detective's voice gave us the word again. The rhythmic tugging continued. Something dark appeared, quite abruptly at the top of the hole. My nerves leapt in spite of me, but it was merely the top of the detective's head, his dark hair. Something white came next. His pale face with staring eyes, then his shoulders, bowed forward the better to support what was in his arms. Then I looked away, but as he laid his burden down on the side of the well, the detective whispered to us, "He had her covered up with dirt." Covered up. He began to laugh, a little high cackle like a child's, until the coroner took him by the shoulders and deliberately shook him. Then the policeman led him out of the cellar. It was not then, but afterward, that I put my question to the coroner. "Tell me," I demanded. "People pass there at all hours. Why didn't my uncle call for help?" "I have thought of that," he replied. "I believe he did call. I think probably he screamed, but his head was down, and he couldn't raise it. His screams must have been swallowed up in the well." "You are sure he didn't murder her?" He had given me that assurance before, but I wished it again. "Almost sure," he declared, "though it was on his account undoubtedly that she killed herself. Few of us are punished as accurately for our sins as he was. One should be thankful, even for crumbs of comfort. I am thankful. But there are times when my uncle's face rises before me. After all, we were the same blood. Our sympathies had much in common. Under any given circumstances, our thoughts and feelings must have been largely the same. I seemed to see him in that final death march along with the unlighted passageway, obeying an imperative summons, going on, step by step, down the stairway to the first floor, down the cellar stairs, at last lifting the slab. I try not to think of the final expiation. Yes, yet was it final, I wonder? Did the last door of all, when it opened, find him willing to pass through? Or was something waiting beyond that door? Dun dun dun. Well, what did you guys think of that one? I actually enjoyed that. I thought it was pretty good. Well, I actually liked all three of them, but... Well, I will definitely do more of these because I've got a bunch of issues of Astounding Stories of Super Science, and I also have several more Weird Tales magazines to do those with. I picked up a collection of Robert E. Howard. If you don't know who Robert E. Howard was, he actually created Conan the Barbarian. And he also wrote some stories in that are related to H.P. Lovecraft's Cthulhu mythos. So, yeah. So there's just a treasure trove of public domain stories out there for us to experience, which is, I love that, right? So that's where we will leave our stories tonight. Some things should have stayed buried, some refuse to be explained, and some wait patiently for us to notice them. Thank you all for spending a little bit of your time with me tonight. And join me on Friday for another night of stories. I think I'm actually going to be doing one Isaac Asimov, one Arthur C. Clarke, and one Philip K. Dick. Lily, I don't know of that one, but I can certainly look into it. I'm always up for suggestions. I will see. We will be here on Friday. So now, before you guys run out of the room, so Friday will be another night of stories. And we've done some Stephen King, so that is definitely a possibility. And Sunday, I've been talking about this for 2 months, but Sunday, we're going to start our week-long event. We'll start on Sunday, continue on Wednesday and Friday. We might be done by then, but it is a literary masterpiece, sir. It's right up there with, the Lorax. I speak for the trees. So we start on this coming Sunday. We continue on Wednesday and Friday, and possibly the following Sunday. But we're going to read at least 3 nights in a row. We're going to be reading The Wonderful Wizard of Oz by L. Frank Baum. I do have some special things planned for it. It's going to be fun. It is going to be fun. So I hope you'll join me. Like I said, it's going to be Sunday, Wednesday, and Friday of next week. Pat Jackson, my live streams all start at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And I go for 2 hours. So that's about all my voice can handle before it starts to go. You can already hear it. My voice is starting to go. I stream on Sundays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. Sundays is Sunday Night Bedtime Stories, where we read family-friendly stuff and children's chapter books. We just finished Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, and we've done Mrs. Frisbee and the Rats of Nim, A Wrinkle in Time, Mouse and the Motorcycle. So there you go. But so next week we'll be doing The Wizard of Oz, and then possibly the following Sunday I am going to bite the bullet and I'm going to read Charlotte's Web. That's going to be 2 Sundays, I believe, and you can all watch me cry when I get to the end. So stick around for that. Well, it has been a lovely evening. And thank you all so much for spending a couple of hours with me. I love doing this. This is my joy. I look forward to this every week. I look forward to Sunday, Wednesday, and Friday. Yeah. You guys keep me going. And thank you tonight. Wow, we had a good night tonight, too. That's amazing. So, if you enjoy these stories and would like to support what I do here, there's 2 options. One is the superfan option, which is for live specifically, and the other is the subscription, which is on my channel, and that's like $2.99 a month, but it does help keep the campfire lit. But I will say this, subscribed or not, I am just happy that you are here to join us and listen to these stories and relax for a couple of hours in this crazy world. And I appreciate every one of you. So, until next time, please be kind to each other and be kind to yourself, because kindness matters. And so do you. Good night, everybody.